Hi, everyone. Welcome to the last Academic Success Series webinar of the semester. As tradition, we will be talking about final exams, a little bit of final exam prep strategies, some time management strategies, and some kind of leave you guys with some other resources to go and explore as you go into the last couple of days of the semester, and to really make sure you guys are utilizing those reading days effectively, and not trying to help minimize some of the stress that is inherent as part of this final exam season. As always, I am Ashley Ray. I'm the Disability and Learning Skills Specialist at the School of Continuing Studies, and I am joined here with my colleague, Annie Balot, who is the Learning Skills Specialist on Main campus. All right, before we get started, just some housekeeping. You stay connected with us on our social media. Our Facebook is /ARC Georgetown. Our Instagram is ARC_Georgetown. We will be kind of going on a hiatus with the webinar series through the summer. As always, you can go and find those archived webinars on our website at academicsupport.georgetown.edu. Those are great if you are taking classes or just want a little bit of a brush up before fall semester starts. Those are always there for your use, as well as downloadable resources. So make sure you check those out. Follow us on social media so you know when we're back in the swing of things for the next fall semester. All right, so we will be talking a little bit about some resources today that we have screenshotted and shared and we'll be going through. But if you want to follow along as we're talking through these, or you want to download them or print them to use them later, you can find them again on our website, which is academicsupport.georgetown.edu. You're going to click on the Academic Support tab at the very top of the screen. You're going to go to Academic Resources, Exam Prep, and then Final Exam Prep. And there you will find this worksheet we will be going
over. Okay, so thanks, Ashley, for that introduction. This is a really great handout that I would recommend all of you printing off and thinking through your final exam season. So what final exams do you have on the horizon? And this will help you start to think about the details that are going into each final exam. How are things going to be formatted? What types of material do you need to be studying for this exam? And really set you up for success in creating a study schedule when it comes to carving out time for each of your finals. So the first step of this handout is to list each of the courses that you're in and the grade in each of your courses. So this is a good time to do a gut check, look on Canvas, maybe have a conversation with your professor or TA to see where you're at grade-wise in the class. Of course, grades are not the most important factor, but we want to make sure that we're going into the final exam season knowing where we're at, and we can kind of gauge what your performance in the class so far. Next step is to list the date, time, and building room location for each of your final exams. And we're going to show you the link that you can actually use to access that information. It's on the registrar's website. But again, we want to make sure that you have thought through the information for each of your final exams, because chances are actually some of your finals might be in different buildings or different room locations than the actual class that you had throughout the semester. So we want to make sure that you have that information up front so that you can feel prepared, you can feel like you have you're organized going into final exams.
And Annie, this is a great resource to look at the day of. I think I've shared before, during my undergrad years, I did not do this and went to the wrong room. I was able to fix it because I showed up a little bit early, but a lot of times there's a lot of stress and kind of adrenaline running through right before the final exam, and we forget to think about the little things because a lot of times there are going to be changes to the time, to the date, to the classroom. We've seen it a lot through our office, so make sure you have this down, maybe put it in front of your desk, keep it in a notebook, but it's really important, especially as you kind of lead up to the morning of.
Yeah, and it's actually, that's really important because for the spring final exams, we have 2 Saturdays of final exams. So ensuring that you know when and where your final exams are, again, like Ashley mentioned, it's a small step, but it's a really important one just so that you can feel less anxious, feel less overwhelmed, because you already have that information written down and known going into final exams. Okay, and this is the link that I was referring to. So it's on the registrar's website. It'll link to a schedule where you can look up your particular class and the professor, and it'll give you the classroom location, the day and time of your particular final exam. So I would spend some time, again, using this handout as a resource to jot down all the final exams, the in-person final exams, the online exams, whatever final exam you might have, and then think about and go seek the information to find the date, the time, and the test location, just to make sure you have all that information squared away.
Great. So step 2, we're going to dig into a little bit about test format. So this is really important, again, in just helping mitigate some of that stress, really have a good understanding of what your exam is going to be like. So you want to be prepared so there's no surprises. This is also a great tool for helping drive some self-testing strategies, which we'll talk about a little bit later on. So you want to look at what your test format is. So is it a multiple choice? Is it an essay? Is it a short answer? Is it a fill in the blank? Whatever that is, figure that out and write that down there. And I just also want to do a little plug. If you want to dive a little bit deeper into test taking strategies for multiple choice exams, true false exams, shorter answer exams, we've actually already have done webinars on these. They're during our final exam webinars from the last semester, and I believe the fall of 2018 or the fall of 2017 as well. So you can go to our website, academicsupport.georgetown.edu, click on the academic support tab, academic success webinars, and you can watch those webinars, which some really useful information about test taking strategies for multiple choice, true false, what to do if you get stuck, how to kind of prep for a essay exam. So please utilize that resource. But after you determine what the test format is on, you're going to look at what the content is covered. And this is, again, really going to help you with your planning for your study days and leading up to the exam. Some exams are going to be cumulative. So we'll talk a little bit about how to address those kind of time management strategies for studying for cumulative exams. Some are just going to be on the final couple chapters of the class or the last few lecture notes. So whatever that is, make sure it's there. If there's any kind of special content or something added in, make sure you make a note of that. Maybe check with some peers in your class to make sure you're not missing anything. And then this piece I really like is the content sources. And doing this prep work up front is going to make study time a little bit easier, and you're really going to be able to focus when you sit down to study. So where can you find the information? Is it lecture notes? Maybe you missed a lecture because you're sick. Can you get those lecture notes from a classmate? Is it handouts? Is it textbooks? If there are certain chapters or sections covered in a textbook, maybe go ahead and pre-flag those with some post-it notes or sticky paper, just so it's easily findable when you do sit down to study. And from there, you can really make a to-do list. Maybe there's a couple outstanding assignments or discussion board posts from the semester that you need to wrap up. Maybe you need to go back and reread a chapter or look over some class notes from a class that you might have missed. So this is really gonna help you plan out the next few days of your study days and leading up to this final exam. So go through and do this for each of your classes.
Wonderful. And so next step is to think through the test prep strategies or the self-testing strategies that you are going to implement during your study days and during the time leading up to each final exam that you plan to implement. And Ashley and I have talked a lot about self-testing strategies and the way that you can actively engage with material. And that's really the point we want to drive home, is how can you actively engage with the material to ensure that your retention's increasing, that the information is staying fresh in your mind, We really want to avoid the cramming scenarios that sometimes happen, or trying to learn brand new information the day before or the day of. So we really want to be able to create an effective study schedule that allows us to engage with the material a little bit each day, but thinking about what actual study strategy are you going to do in order to engage with the material. So you can see, again, some options that we've listed. Study groups, we've talked about the effectiveness of study groups and teaching material out loud to peers, finding a study partner, creating flashcards. This could be on Quizlet, it could be on Anki, which is another one, ANKI, that I've heard some students use. It could be looking through old exams and quizzes, retaking those exams and quizzes, going to class review sessions, especially going to class review sessions if your particular professor or TA is hosting them. So we really want you to think thoroughly about each of the exams that you have and how can you engage with the material and what specific strategies are you going to implement moving forward.
And I think another really great thing, Annie, is you don't test prep strategies, things like flashcards or using an app or just reviewing old class notes is something that you can go ahead and start doing now while you're winding up the semester to kind of get yourself familiar with it, kind of get back into that final exam prep mode, and maybe start going over some of that older material now to get yourself familiar with it to build up to where you need to be on test day. Again, so here are some great self-testing strategies. Our favorite kind of final exam prep tip, as Annie shared. Creating associations, examples with the materials. So, little phrases. If, this is a great place with creating associations where you might be able to use a mind map. So really look at the material, seeing how it's connected with the other material in class. That's a great strategy to start implementing. The others are complete practice exams and test-like conditions. I would highly recommend this, especially because I think we're all naturally a little bit nervous going into final exams and taking the final exams. So help calm those nerves, help build up some confidence by taking those practice exams. And I think by even coming up with some practice exam questions is part of that studying process. And you're really going to engage in the material on a deeper level by coming through those questions, looking at maybe old test questions, or maybe using a study guide that your professor provided. And this is a great thing that you can do with your peers, is you guys all can come up with a couple of test prep questions, so that way you guys kind of have a practice test to take before the exam. Use different outlines or notes depending on the course material. Again, I mentioned mind mapping is a great way to help create associations, but outline something and kind of organize your notes in a way that makes sense for you. Highlight, use stars, Post-its, whatever it is to make sure that you are drawing yourself attention to the material that needs to be covered, maybe needs a little bit more review time, and that you're able, again, to review it in maybe 5 or 10 minute increments. Maybe you have a couple minutes in between classes. Maybe you can look at some flashcards by walking across campus. Again, it's these little chunks of study time really do add up. And so having things outlined and ready to go is a great way to start incorporating that in. And then the most important is using your own words to summarize main points. As Annie said, if you're able to talk through the material or teach it to someone else or take major theories or ideas and put it into your own words, that shows a sense of mastery. So again, these are some great self-testing strategies. Try to implement these as you can. It really will help you get more comfortable and confident with the material and hopefully make things a little bit more easier on exam day.
Yeah, and some more self-testing strategies to think through. Can you make word cards, question cards, flashcards? This could be physical flashcards. This could be through Quizlet as well. Another nice feature of Quizlet is you can look through the pre-made quizzes that other peers across the world have created for certain subjects and for certain material. I would, of course, vet the material first to make sure that it is accurate and it is, matches the information that you have. But that could be another way that you test yourself if you are, looking for assistance in accounting. Maybe you can browse through the pre-made questions or the quizzes on there to see what types of questions to assess whether you understand the material, or do you need to pinpoint areas that you have to go back and review. So that could be a really good self-testing strategy to implement, and a good way to parse out the information you're comfortable with and the information that you need to dive a little deeper in. Make self-tests. So this is going hand in hand with what we just talked about, predicting questions that are going to be similar to ones that you've seen previously, and then practicing actually answering those questions, especially if they're open-ended or essay questions. One of our main suggestions is to practice the act of writing to answering those questions prior to entering the final exam. Again, we want to make sure that you are as prepared as you can be going into the final exam. So practicing the skills that you will be assessed on during the final exam is really important during your study days and the days leading up to your finals. And lastly, studying in groups, like we mentioned before, is one of the best self-testing strategies. If you don't have a peer, you're not comfortable talking out loud or teaching material to someone else, you can use the voice memo app on your phone or any other recording app to record yourself talking out loud through a process or a set of notes. And then you can listen back to it. In the act of listening back to it, you can have your notes in front of you and check to make sure that you said everything you wanted to say or you said things correctly. And again, a really good way to parse out, did I say that correctly? Am I comfortable with this information? And then if not, thinking of through how else you can engage with the material to ensure that you really understand it moving forward.
Great. So we're going to talk a little bit about how to really prepare for finals as we get into it. So not just what's on the exam, how to use self-testing strategies, but how are you really breaking down the material and understanding what's important? So first, break down that course material into study-ready chunks, right? So you should not be sitting down and reviewing all of your lecture notes from the beginning of the semester till now. It's going to be overwhelming. You're not going to be able to retain as much information. So do what makes sense for you. Is it a class at a time? Is it a chapter at a time? What makes sense with what's covered on the exam? What areas that you know you might need to spend a little bit more time in and reviewing, and kind of set up a system that works best. So break that down, and then that's really helpful too when you're talking about study schedules, is that you can start inserting those kind of course study ready chunks into your schedule and makes it a little bit more manageable. Again, we've talked about this a lot, but always start with the oldest material first. It's the stuff that's way back at the beginning of the semester that you might have forgotten. So if you start with the oldest first and then kind of work your way to where you are currently, your brain will kind of build upon that, and it will help trigger some of that information as you make your way through the semester. Know what's important. Maybe it's from a study guide. Maybe your professor came out and straight up said this is going to be on the exam, but it's important that when you're preparing your study ready chunks, that you're noting what's important, either with post-it and asterisk, whatever it is. Make sure you understand that and you kind of can go back and review that as the days go by. Again, write specific questions down or pinpoint areas of confusion. This is the time right now as we're wrapping up the semester and going into study days that you want to utilize those office hours if you have not already. You want to utilize study groups. You want to utilize study review sessions. So make sure you kind of have a brief overview of what's on the exam, what it is that you need to cover, and where you might need a little bit more support, and get those questions answered now so it doesn't feel very last minute and you're not having to kind of cram that night before.
Perfect. So now thinking through how to create a study schedule, there are a few factors that we want you to think about as you begin planning your study days and again the days leading up to your final exams. So like Ashley mentioned just now, knowing the material that needs to be studied, and maybe again you are separating it based on this information I'm really good with, and these are the information or the material and the units from February that I need to review a bit more. So really understanding the material that needs to be studied, what's going to be assessed on the exam, and then your own comfortability with the material is a really good factor to consider when creating your study schedule. And thinking through your high and low periods of concentration. Since you have 2 full days of study days, we want you to utilize those to the best of your ability, but thinking through when are you going to be most effective during those days. It's probably not realistic that you're going to be studying for 24 hours a day both of those days. That's just not a good use of your time. So thinking through, maybe you could set up some study time in the morning on one day, and then you're going to look at another bit of material later on that evening. So thinking about when are you most effective, when are you going to be most focused, and using that to your advantage, and then being really specific about the work or the material that you're going to focus on during that time. Ashley already mentioned this, but ensuring that you're studying in time blocks. So research actually proves that students are more effective with a 45-50-minute period of time with a 10 to 15-minute break. So thinking through for 40-45 minutes, what material you're going to study and what specific strategies are you going to implement. And then after that 45 minutes or maybe 50 minutes, if you're feeling like you're on a roll, can you take a break? Take a 10-15-minute break, take a step back from the material, let yourself reset, refocus, and do something that gives your brain a rest, and then come back after you've had that time away. What I tell students is, unfortunately, the break should be boring. It shouldn't be social media, it shouldn't be Netflix, it shouldn't be our phones. We want to think about something that's going to help us take a step away, but doesn't detract us from getting back on track or deter us from getting back on track. So maybe it's listening to music, maybe it's taking a walk in this beautiful weather. Maybe it's just making yourself something to eat. I've heard some students take some time to clean their apartment or clean their room during their time. So really thinking about what is something that you can use as a break time during your studying, but really incorporating those breaks so that you can withstand the intense studying that you're going to do, but really help yourself retain the information. That's the most important. And then moving on to studying the same subject throughout the week is proved to help with retention. So what we encourage you to do is a little bit every day. Can you study accounting? Can you look over your calculus notes? Is there information for another class that you can break up throughout the day? Maybe there's some pages that you have to read in order to write a paper. Instead of trying to sit down and read 50 pages at a time, can you plan to read 15 pages in the morning, do some review, and then finish up in the evening? And then continue to put that into place in the days following as well. So thinking about how can you engage with the material a little bit every day is better than one long chunk in one day and then not looking at the material again. Thinking through your environment. So if you are in a distracting environment, we would recommend removing yourself from that environment as soon as possible. It's not helpful for you to stay in a study environment that is just not benefiting you and that is not helping with your retention. So thinking through what area on campus are you the most productive, can you be the most focused, and if that environment is not working for you, change it immediately. Don't wait a few more hours, because then you're just going to feel like it's not productive. I haven't been as productive as I want it to be, and that might increase the feelings of being overwhelmed. So change it up as soon as possible. And then thinking through your learning style and related tools and strategies. So thinking of how do you best learn and how can you incorporate that into your studying? And again, all of this is going into creating a study schedule for the next week, next 2 weeks, whenever your final exams are. Think about what can you do a little bit each day and what specific strategies, time of day, are you going to implement into your study schedule?
Great, thanks so much, Annie. So now that we've talked about kind of what goes into a study schedule, we're going to give you some examples of study schedules that we really, really like and are really helpful. Again, you're not meant to spend a lot of time on these, so they're kind of set up in a way that you can kind of plug in with what works best for you. And they kind of work best with different learning styles, different commitment levels. So we'll start going through these, and you guys can pick and choose and maybe combo a little bit of both. So we'll start with this one I really like because this really builds upon that rule about studying oldest material first. And you can really break it down by chapter. So if there's a lot of content coming from books or lecture notes, this is a great one to really help you chunk in that way. So for this study schedule, we start on a Sunday, and you're preparing chapter 1 and you're spending 2 hours. I think the time frame is really important here. It helps hold you accountable. But as Annie mentioned, you're not going to go kind of spending 8 hours and start kind of forgetting the material around hour 5 or 6. So this is great because it accounts again for that preparation time. So all these things that we talked about chunking material, about taking note of what's most important, about reviewing material that maybe you missed because you missed a class or might need a little bit more clarification on. This really accounts for all of that. So Sunday, you're preparing chapter 1, you're spending about 2 hours for it. On Monday, you're preparing chapter 2, spending 2 hours, and then you're reviewing chapter 1 for just 30 minutes. So that time is going to digress little by little as we progress throughout the week. Tuesday, we're going to throw in chapter 3. We're going to prepare it for 1.5 hours, spend 30 minutes reviewing chapter 2 that we prepared yesterday, and then just 15 minutes reviewing chapter 1. And this is, as that time decreases, this is really where you want to hone in just on important points, discussion questions, areas that you might need a little bit more review. And so you're going to start being really targeted. On Wednesday, you see that we're preparing chapter 4, and we're spending less time preparing because you should be getting a little bit of a routine, and there should kind of almost be a little bit of a formula. Again, you can adjust these times as needed and what works best for you. Don't under-prepare because that might come out on the exam, but there's kind of good rules. As Annie said, you want to really use kind of 45 minutes of focus and that 15-minute break off. And then Thursday, we're reviewing all of the chapters, and then we're doing that self-test. So again, going back to that self-testing strategy that we love so much, and that really is going to tell you where you're at and where you may need to go back and review. So love this one. This is kind of a great example to use. And again, you can see on Wednesday, we threw in a study group session as well. So that's helpful to kind of talk through, maybe teach the material to someone else.
This is another schedule that is very similar to the one Ashley just talked us through. And I think the idea here, when you see day 1 to prepare and self-test, you can see self-test is all throughout the days. But the thing I really want to point out is under the column of material, it says first, oldest or hardest chunk of material. And so like Ashley mentioned, we really want to focus on that information first because chances are it's less fresh in your mind. And then as the days proceed, then you can start introducing maybe the units that you might be more comfortable with, or the units that are more recently taught than back in the beginning of the spring semester. So thinking through and being really specific about the days that you have leading up to the exam, what the material is. And again, during that self-testing, I wouldn't just say self-test. You have to be more specific to say what type of strategy are you going to implement. Is it a peer-to-peer review session? Is it you creating questions on Quizlet? Is it you consolidating your notes and rewriting your notes? So really thinking through how you're preparing, how you're reviewing, and then how you're self-testing for the thinking through, especially for cumulative exams, the oldest or the hardest chunk of material, and then progressing as you move through the days.
Great. Thanks, Annie. So this one is a 5-day out study plan. So a great one to implement right now, or as we're moving into kind of study days. The first part of the 5-day out study plan is really organizing. So preparing that list of topics that's going to be on an exam. You might remember at the beginning of the webinar, you have that handy dandy resource that you've already listed that out on. So that's going to be helpful in preparing. And then list the order of importance, or, find a way to denote what's really important. Maybe it's an essay exam on a specific topic. So maybe you need to spend a little bit more time on that so you can really write a thorough, well thought out essay. Then secondly, reviewing and recalling. So review material that you can recall all important information, and then focus on what the difficult topics are. And some different recall strategies to use are flashcards, teaching the material out loud to someone else, or as Annie mentioned, if you can't do that, utilize that voice memo app, an audio recorder, whatever it is, to hear yourself teaching the material and making sure that you're hitting the important points of the material and that it's, you know, explained in a way that really makes sense, that someone else like Annie or myself who doesn't know anything on the topic could come in and understand. All right, so the last kind of couple strategies for this 5-day out study plan is rewrite. So recall your own explanations of the material. So using things, rewriting it in your own words. Questions, again, going back, make a list of questions that might be on the exam, and then answer those as much detail as possible. And we've talked a lot about you can use your notes. Maybe your professor has provided you with a study guide. Maybe there's a textbook with some discussion questions in the back. Use that to help make your list of questions. And again, you're engaging in that studying process as you're coming up with those questions. And then finally, prepare. So review the notes a few hours before the exam. This really should just be a review. You shouldn't be learning new material at this point in time. You shouldn't be trying to cram. This really should just kind of be a refresher of the most important things so that you're feeling a little bit better moving into that exam period.
All right, thanks for that, Ashley. So those are definitely some strategies and some schedules that you can tweak to make it fit your schedule depending on when your final exams are, but just the main outlines of things to think through and how can you engage with the material a little bit each day, how can you be really thoughtful about your plan, and hopefully those resources can be helpful. Okay, to wrap up the webinar, we're just going to talk through some general test taking strategies when it comes to final exams or just exams in general. Some things to think about is, could you do a preview of the exam before even beginning answering any questions? And during this preview, it could be a really good time to budget time for each section if there are natural sections in the exam. And for instance, maybe there are multiple choice questions, some true false, and then the end has an essay or some open-ended questions. So it allows yourself some idea of how much time you want to spend on certain sections so that we're not feeling that racing of the clock, and we've already given ourselves some budget or an estimate of how much time to spend. During that preview, you can also do start to note questions that are similar in nature to one another. And so what I mean by that is maybe there are certain questions that are assessing the same type of process or the same material, but it's being asked in different ways. And if you make a star or just a circle note next to each of those questions and you get stuck on one of them, you can always refer back to another one that you might have answered or you might have understood a little bit better to look for context clues or to look for some recall that can help you answer the question that you're having trouble on. Again, during that preview would be a good idea, especially if it's like a math course or some sort of analytical course, to write down all the formulas or concepts that you really want to remember and that you don't want to stress out about forgetting. So as soon as you get to the exam, do a brain dump, do some, jot down some notes if you're allowed on information that you want to remember so that you can relieve your mind of that pressure to hold on to it and you can allow yourself time to process through questions and come up with a thoughtful answer. Of course, read directions thoroughly, get clarification if needed. Don't wait until the end and then you might run out of time. We want to make sure that we're getting that clarification when we need it. A really good strategy is to, if you're stuck on a question, is could you rewrite the question in your own words? Could you maybe highlight or just point out the action items or the things that you need to do in order to answer the question? And this can help negate all of the extraneous information that might be included in the question, really help you focus on what is the task at hand, especially for some of those questions that might be trying to trip you up or just include a lot of different information. So really focus on what do I need to do to answer the question? Can I rewrite it? And again, if you're still confused on what the question's asking you, of course, ask your professor or TA as soon as possible. Some other things to think about: could you complete a brainstorm next to questions that you might be stuck on? Maybe just thinking through the steps that you would need to take in order to solve a math problem, or just what things come to mind when you think through or reading through the question. So doing a brainstorm, just coming up with some notes, is really helpful to help yourself recall that information, get your mind rolling so that you can process the information and pick the best choice. And finally, make sure to spend some time at the end to review your answers. And this is where budgeting time for that is really important. And only change your answers if you're certain. I think everyone's had that experience where we've gone back to change an answer that we weren't really sure of, and we might not have made the best decision. So go back, review your answers at the end, but only change the answers if you are completely certain. And those will be some good strategies moving forward into your final exam season.
All right. Thanks so much, guys. We wish you the best as you're wrapping up the semester and as you're heading into the final exam period. Take a deep breath, make sure you're getting at least 8 hours of sleep last night. Utilize resources, CAP, Student Health, if you're not feeling well and need some extra support. Everyone is there to support you and wish you well. As always, you can leave feedback on our feedback survey, and we would love to hear from you. And until next semester, we will see you soon, and good luck on finals.